kind of as an inward journey. Spirituality has been defined as that aspect of humanity that refers to the way that individuals seek and express meaning and purpose, right? So I want us to pause there for just a minute. So about meaning and purpose and about connection, as I mentioned a minute ago. It's about how we experience our connectedness to this moment, to the present moment, to ourselves, to others, to nature, to what we might define as sacred, whether that involves a God or Godhead, a series of gods, or whether that involves something more abstract. But there's that sense of it being beyond ourselves. Spirituality is a subjective experience and usually focuses on inward journeys. Religion is sort of the outward manifestation of that inward journey. Religion is often defined as an institutionalized system of attitudes and beliefs and practices and values. Religion is a place where we find our communities, where we come together as a community in service to that sense of connectedness. Often it's about worship. Sometimes it's about service to one another, but it's usually organized and it's usually communal. And it usually focuses on the externals that help us to express those inward states of meaning and purpose and peace and connectedness. And often those outward states include things like ritual, getting together on Sunday mornings, participating in communion or sacrament, reading scripture together, going to a place, a house of worship, etc. So it's really about the outward manifestation of that inward journey. And anthropologists have suggested through many years of research and looking at cultures around the world that spirituality, at least in the sense of trying to find meaning and purpose and connectedness, really is a human universal. And certainly different societies express those needs in different ways. Not all societies even have a term for religion. In some societies, religion is so much a part of everyday experience that some societies don't even have a sense of how the sacred is different than the mundane, right? But the sense here is that it is a fundamental part of human experience and consciousness to seek meaning, and that really is the work of religion and spirituality to help us do that. So that's kind of an overview. So how does this relate to spiritual wellness? So spiritual wellness is associated with the ability, right, to feel kind of at peace. Like we do feel connected. We do feel like there's meaning. We do have a sense of alignment with our values. We do have a sense of being able to share those things with one another and to be able to come together in community, right? And spiritual wellness is part of the wellness wheel that all of us on campus are devoted to cultivating, and that students, particularly young adults, are in the process of making and remaking as part of the work of moving from adolescence to adulthood. Spiritual wellness is one of those aspects of the wellness wheel that we are paying more and more attention to on college campuses today, recognizing that this is a legitimate source of inquiry and that we need to be able to provide opportunities for students to engage in the exploration of spiritual and religious identities as part of what it means to become a healthy adult, right? So what are some examples of that sense of spiritual identity, right? And this is different for different people. So I'm just laying out some examples. Certainly for many people, there's the sense of prayer, contemplation, meditation, coming into awareness of the present moment, sort of tuning down the chatter of the future-directed mind or the past-directed mind, turning down those concerns about what happened in the past or what's happening in the future, and really tuning in to the sacredness of what's here in the now. And so many people do that through activities like prayer, meditation, contemplation, etc. As I mentioned a minute ago, spiritual and religion are spirituality and religion are interconnected. And so as that outward facing journey, right, many people express and reaffirm and continually navigate and build their spiritual inward journey through those outward rituals, that outward community, right? Through attending church, through attending temple, through those sacraments, etc. And that's, of course, not just, our my site didn't work. So here's the sum total of it, right? For some people, it's about religion, right? And not maybe as in our own backyard, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which of course for many people here in Utah is the religion of choice, but certainly from an interfaith perspective, from a multi-faith perspective, many different religious traditions provide the same kind of function and meaning for people, right? And for some people, it's not that connection, again, is not about religion at all. It might be about family. It might be about that feeling of being in nature and feeling that awe and inspiration and connectedness and just wonder of the natural world. For some people, it might be about the sense of love that is shared with family or pets, right? But people express their spirituality in many different ways. So I'd like you to take for just a moment and reflect, just maybe quietly on your own. How do you define your spiritual identity, right? How does this identity offer you meaning and purpose and connection to something beyond yourself? How does it inform your values? And how do you express it? Through outward connection with others like you, through prayer and quiet contemplation? How does it help you live your values and feel at peace with your walk on this earth? So I'm just going to take 1 minute and let you reflect on these questions. Okay, well, in the interest of time, I actually gave you closer to 30 seconds because we got started a minute or so late. But I want to really emphasize that this sense of spirituality is, I believe, a human universal, right? And it is not always about the supernatural. In fact, on the left of your screen, you have the 10 humanist commitments, right? So this sense of being able to be connected with those values, right, can be reflected as much for humanists and atheists and agnostics, as for people who identify as spiritual but not religious, as for people who identify as part of a major religious tradition, etc. So the next question is, how do we support spiritual wellness on college campuses? Because as I mentioned a minute ago, we're becoming more aware that that identity wheel, it really includes that sense of supporting students as they explore their own spiritual and religious commitments. And so college campuses around the country do things to help students in that exploration. Sometimes it's about creating activities that support the exploration of big questions. Sometimes we do this in the classroom, particularly in classes that are parts of the humanities, where we're really encouraging students to explore the biggest questions in their lives in the context of how other thinkers in the past have explored those questions, right? So sometimes it happens in the classroom. Sometimes it happens outside of the classroom. And more on college campuses and our own campus as well, administrations are creating spaces where students can go and get away and meditate or pray during the course of the day. And we have a wonderful reflection room in the TSC on the third floor, right across from the Inclusion Center, where people can go for quiet reflection during the day. Sometimes it's about providing students with opportunities for aesthetic engagement. Because as I mentioned a minute ago, that sense of coming into awareness of the present moment is that place where we can often engage different parts of our brain that can help us to feel more connected. And it's not surprising that in every religious tradition, the aesthetics, the art, the music, the smells, the sounds are really an important part of that engagement, because that part of our brain which we can engage aesthetically can also help us to really come into that centered place. And most campuses are also providing opportunities for students to engage in this exploration by encouraging conversation and relationship building. Because if connection is really one of the main parts of spiritual wellness and spiritual identity, we want to be able to provide space for connection and relationship building, for exploration as well as outward expression. So what about our campus, right? If we want to talk about conversations and relationship building, the suggestion is that we have to provide space for that and opportunities for students to engage in conversation, both in the classroom and out of the classroom. One of the other things that we know about humans is that we are storytelling creatures, that we make meaning through sharing who we are with others. And in the process of that relational sharing of speaking and of receiving, we sort of rethink what works for us and what doesn't. So discussions about religion and spirituality are important to be able to have on college campuses. But how about here at USU? If some of you are laughing, it's because we all know religion is the elephant in the room, right? I hear that over and over and over again. So I want to just ask the question, why is this? And maybe, again, just ask us to reflect on this for a moment as I share a little bit more information. Why is this? Well, partly it's who we are, right? Since 2013, I've been engaged in campus climate research, both qualitative and also facilitating quantitative research that we participated in as part of a cohort of more than 120 campuses as part of the Interfaith Diversity Experiences and Attitudes Longitudinal Survey, IDEALS, which interviewed students as part of a cohort survey when they were freshmen, sophomores, and then again when they were seniors, to ask these kinds of questions. What's campus like? How supportive is it of these kinds of relationship building activities? How do students feel about engaging with those deepest parts of themselves, with the big questions, and with others who orient around religion differently than they do as part of their campus experience? So we've been part of this research, as I said, both qualitatively. I way back in 2014 engaged students, staff, and faculty in a series of roundtables and then interviews, and asked the question, is it important for you to be able to express your religious and spiritual identity on campus? And do you feel safe doing so? And why or why not? And we found out some things along the way, both with that quantitative survey and also with the qualitative work. First of all, not surprisingly, we're a very religious campus. The majority of us are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Now, the percentages that you see on the right are percentages that we learned by interviewing and, by having students participate in this IDEAL survey. We learned that 70% of incoming freshmen identify as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints when they are coming to campus. and the breakdown of students in other categories, you can see there on the screen. Interestingly, USU, just like other college campuses and just like society at large and just like the world at large, the fastest growing category of folks both on campus, in our communities, and the world are the folks who identify as none, N-O-N-E, which is to say, when asked the question, what is your religious affiliation? They check none. They check the box none, which doesn't necessarily mean that I don't believe. It means that I'm not part of an organized religion, right? And on our campus, that's about 17%, including atheists, agnostics, those who identify as spiritual but not religious, those who identify as religious but haven't really found a community that fits, right? It's a very large percentage of who we are. But we are majority LDS, right? And I don't know if you know this, but the LDS Institute actually is the largest institute in the state in terms of numbers of students who participate. More than 50% of our on-campus students are also enrolled in classes at the Institute. And the Institute, as well as LDS culture and LDS, identity is really visible on our campus. No surprise. But that contributes to the sense of the elephant in the room. Right? As I mentioned a minute ago in this research, I asked the question, how important is it for me to be able to express those commitments, and how important are those commitments to me? And what we found is that 89% of our students said, well, first of all, more than 90% of those that were part of that were answering this question, which was half of the freshman class in 2015. First of all, more than 90% of students said, yeah, this part of my identity is really important. And 89% said it's important for me to be able to talk about it, right? But we also found that most students didn't feel safe talking about it. Different reasons for different kinds of students. LDS students talked about something called Mormon bashing, the fear of really showing themselves and their spiritual and religious selves, particularly in the classroom, because of feeling like they would be they would be stereotyped, or they would be laughed at, or they would be misunderstood, right? When I asked students who were part of this research project who no longer identified as Mormon, how they felt about expressing their religious or spiritual identities, they talked about wanting to kind of stay in the closet, and they actually used that term of staying in the closet because of fears of being judged as immoral by their Mormon peers. Students who participated in what we on our campus would call minority religions talked about not really wanting to share, maybe wanting to pass as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, rather than coming out as Buddhist, or rather than coming out as a Sikh, or rather than coming out as a non-denominational Christian, because they didn't want to be proselyted. They didn't want to be evangelized. They didn't want to be pressured, and they didn't want to be something called friendshiped, which is this concern that students who are not members of the church suggest that when they attended social functions, that there was often sort of an unspoken agenda. It was really, hey, come to my function, but along the way, we're maybe going to talk about inviting you to my church, right? And of course, atheists and agnostics feel the least understood on our campus, right? And talked about all of those things, not wanting to be evangelized, not wanting to be judged, not wanting to be friendshipped. And so what was the result? For us, campus safe spaces are us all staying in our own little boxes. Don't ask, don't tell. I'll just stay in the closet. I don't want to be judged. I'd rather anybody not know. But of course, if talking about this aspect of our identities is a really important part of healthy growth into adulthood, and also something important for our students on campus, there comes, as in any human relationship, when you're withholding a large part of yourself, a sense of isolation, a sense of marginalization, a sense of just feeling very alone. And so that's an issue. So that's why we created many years ago in 2014, the Interfaith Initiative, which had as its objective to create a welcoming campus and to build connection among all who orient around religion differently. And to do that, the research shows that we need to do three things. We need to be able to learn how to share who we are, how to share all of those pieces of who we are. We need to develop skills and courage to be able to share vulnerably. And that involves setting safe spaces so that there's some rules for engagement, so that if we do dare to share, we're not going to be put down or otherwise made to feel uncomfortable because of our vulnerability. But we also have to learn how to engage appreciatively with those who are different than we are, those who orient around religion differently than we do. And the best way to do that, as it turns out, is to find ways to come together to talk about our identities, not around conversations of doctrinal differences, obviously, or social or political matters, but about conversations of shared value, that we can come together and find that we share values of compassion or social justice, which are, or some of the other values that are really inherent in a lot of religious traditions. If we focus on those values, we can really begin to bring our full selves to the table around a common conversation to alleviate suffering for a common good and build relationship with one another. So how do we do this in a setting where we tend to stay within our bubbles? Well, as I mentioned a minute ago, there's something called the Interfaith Triangle, which says that if you can build relationship with even one person who is different than you are, who orients around religion differently than you are, it turns out that it really does something to all of your assumptions and stereotypes about difference. And that you can enter that interfaith triangle, whether it's about building a relationship with somebody who's different than you are, learning something about a tradition that you didn't know before, or otherwise finding a way to change your attitude by recognizing that, hey, this person might have very different feelings about the LGBTQ community and about marriage, but they are totally into alleviating poverty, just like I am. They're totally into social justice, right? So if we can come together in some ways, we can shift our attitudes, we can build relationship, and it doesn't matter where we enter this triangle, we end up feeling much more comfortable with engaging across difference. On our campus, I think there's a couple of things that we need to do. We need to acknowledge privilege, and I'm not going to talk much about that today. That's another whole conversation that we could have. But we need to acknowledge that just like there is something called white privilege and male privilege, there's also something called religious privilege on our campus, right? Where people might talk with one another as though there's no even understanding that the person that they're talking to isn't a member of their faith, right? Where there's not really a good understanding of or acknowledgement or even awareness that not everybody has family home evening, for instance, or needs Sundays off in order to do their homework assignments, or has a period of time during the year when they're not eating during daylight hours, or needs special religious diets to be served in our cafeterias, right? We're not very good at that. We're not very good at recognizing religious privilege, not because we're mean people, but because we are such a homogenous campus in terms of how many people are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So we need to, first of all, acknowledge privilege. We need to recognize our inherent biases. Anthropologists talk about ethnocentrism as being something that's built into the human condition. Of course, we think that our way is good, right, and true, and we are the center of our own experience, because what else could we be? But can we recognize that our lenses, our perspectives create bias, which makes it difficult to cross those boundaries and to engage across religious difference. And the third thing that we want to acknowledge on our campus, and this is where I want to take us today, is we can begin to cultivate appreciative relationships with people who are different than we are. And we can begin to feel connected in appreciative and meaningful ways if we can learn to be vulnerable enough to share who we are and to feel safe enough to be willing to not only share who we are, but to listen to who others are in ways that are appreciative, that are about learning, that are about dialogue, not debate, that are not about judgment, but that are about finding common humanity. So what do we do in the USU Interfaith Initiative? We have some great icebreakers, and I wanted to introduce one of those icebreakers to you. And some of you might have done one of these icebreakers before, but I want to talk about something called speed faithing. And for this, is it true that we really only have, how many people do we have, Alyssa, now on our call? Do you know?
We have 15 total. That includes you, me, and Tony hosting.
Okay. So what I'm gonna do, what I'm gonna ask, Alyssa, is there any way that you can break us out into rooms, or do I need to stop sharing in order to break us out into rooms?
I can try. I've never done it before, but I can try and figure it out.
Okay. While you're figuring that out, I want to talk about this activity that we do called speed faithing, which is a little bit like speed dating, where you basically are invited to have a structured conversation with a conversation partner after setting some safe space guidelines in a way that you sort of switch conversation partners every 2 or 3 minutes. We all agree before we engage in the structured conversation that we're only going to speak from our experience, that we're not going to represent an entire faith tradition, but we're going to speak about who we are. We agree that we are really interested in learning about the other rather than convincing the other that they ought to come to our way of thinking. We agree that we are going to give the benefit of the doubt if we hear something when others present themselves that encourages or that includes some hurt feelings about a religious tradition that is important to us. We agree to confidentiality, right? Those are things that we agree to in order to engage in these kind of structured spaces. And if it's possible for us to break out in rooms, I am going to suggest that we do that for a few minutes and then come back, and we'll change conversation partners and we'll come back, and we'll change conversation partners and we'll come back. So what'd you find, Alyssa? Do I need to stop the share in order to do the breakout rooms, or
I can break you guys out into breakout rooms. How many rooms do you want?
there's 15 of us, so let's do 7 rooms. And the first thing that we'll do is to introduce ourselves, and we'll start easy. Introduce ourselves, talk about the meaning and origin of our names. What I'm going to suggest, Tony, is that you have like 2 minutes. So each person gets 1 minute to talk about who they are and the meaning and origin of their name, listening carefully, and then we switch, and then you just look at time, people who are in your breakout rooms, and switch conversation partners. And then if you'll bring us back in about 2 minutes, we'll change conversation partners and go to the next question. Does that sound okay?
Yeah.
Okay, let's do it. So those are our questions. Okay, I think everybody's back. I'm going to try and share my screen again. Because of our time, I'm not going to be able to move us through all of the questions. So I'm going to just state what some of the questions are, but maybe we'll do one more breakout, and then I want us to sort of debrief it. So after we start with this very kind of, easy question, then we move on to things like, where do you feel most at home and why? Who most inspires you and why? Okay, is everybody back now? Oh, cool. All right, I'm going to go back in a second. So I was just saying that we're not going to be able to do every single question as a breakout in the interest of time, but I want to, so I'm going to just share with you some of the questions that then we would switch conversation partners. Like if we were standing in a circle, right, then we would just move like a couple people to the left and then have the next question. So I'm just going to share with you what some of the other questions we use are, and then maybe we'll do one more question and then come back and talk about it. So after the introducing question, so kind of fun. After the introducing question, then we might do another round. Where do you feel most at home and why? And then we might do a third round. Who most inspires you and why? And as you can see with each question, we're just kind of getting a little deeper into those questions of meaning and purpose and value. And then what is one of your core values and what's an example of this, right? Usually we allow 45 minutes to or so for the activity. Then we get into it. Did you grow up with a particular religious tradition and what was it? Do you practice that or another religious tradition now? By this time, people are into it. Often I can't get them to stop, right? How does your orientation to religion or your non-religious worldview influence your experience as a student? What's a stereotype about your religion or lack thereof that you want to dispel? What inspires you to act together with others to create a better world? And then we debrief it, right? So, gosh, we only have 10 minutes left. I would love us to do, though, Tony, if we can, just one more breakout session. Could we do the one that asks us, did you grow, and I'll combine these two questions, and maybe we'll give like two minutes for each person. Did you grow up with a particular religious tradition? What was it? And do you practice that or another religious tradition now? So if you can break us out again and then maybe bring us back in like 4 minutes max.
Okay.
So we have a couple minutes to debrief, that would be awesome. Is that okay?
Yep.
Okay, here we go. Okay. Okay, I think we're back. So we have a few minutes. I'd love to just open it up to debrief this activity together. Unmute yourselves, chime in whenever you want. What surprised you, or what challenged you, or what inspired you about this activity? What would you like the rest of us to know about, what it was like for you doing this activity? Who'd like to start?
I'll start, Paula.
Great.
Hi. I think for me, with that short time, what was the greatest benefit was just, the listening portion, learning about someone else. You recognize differences, but more so you recognize similarities in just a short time. And I just think maybe that we were not pushed, but we had the opportunity to do this activity, something I've never done before with these topics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Love it. Who else? Do you want to follow up on that or share a different piece? Thanks, Paula.
I can, if you'd like.
There you go.
So I was actually pretty nervous for this. I feel, as you were talking about the vulnerability that goes into expressing and sharing, I really related to that. So I was pretty nervous about this kind of being, how you described coming out of the closet. I very much relate to that. But I feel like it was a very positive interaction. So it was good to have a positive interaction where those fears can kind of be assuaged. So thanks.
Yeah, great to hear. And I'll tell you that both of what you've said is not surprising at all. People tend to be like, oh, I don't know, I've never done this before. Is it going to be okay? And then often what happens is, like, especially if you have a little bit more time, like 30 or 40 minutes, and you can like really get into it. Usually what happens is the first couple of rounds, by the time it's time to bring people back together, there's silence in the room, they're ready to come back. By the time we really get into the meat of it, it's like I can be like screaming and waving my hands and saying, hey, and people just don't want to stop talking, right? Because it's like something gets uncorked. It's like, wow, I can really share this. Somebody's going to listen to me. This is really cool. Yeah. What else? Who else would like to share? Angie says, I second exactly what Em said. It is a challenge because you're a bit uncomfortable, but you're glad you took the challenge, right? Would anybody disagree with that? Did anybody like finish? And again, I apologize, it's a little bit artificial because we only had like 2 shares. But does anybody want to, do you feel safe enough to be able to say, this sucked, I don't like this? Or does everybody kind of feel like, hey, this was kind of intriguing?
To me, it seemed like this was a safer space to share because these are people who chose to come to this webinar. And so they must care about spirituality and they must have a certain level of openness to other people, knowing that this wasn't sponsored by a certain religious group. Right. And so I still felt nervous that for some reason, it is just oddly very scary to have to talk about religion. And I guess I'm used to being very guarded about those conversations, but this seemed like a more comfortable opportunity.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that.
That was good. I agree.
Yeah, and I think, that's kind of what we're taught, right? Polite conversation can involve anything but religion and politics, right? I mean, and especially on our campus, right? It's just, there's just a lot of tiptoeing around. What's interesting to me though, Polly, is that almost every time I've done this activity, and I've done it probably 50 times now, almost every time people will say, well, I felt kind of cool doing this, but I don't think you could do it in this other place with these other people, right? So it's interesting to me that there's still that sense of, well, yes, of course we have to create a container, right? Because one of the reasons people don't like talking about their spiritual and religious identities is because they don't like, being judged or all of those other things that I shared that keeps us in boxes. And because, as Em said, it's personal, it's deeply held, right? It's an important part of our identities. It's something we hold as precious, as sacred, right? And yet, the sense in which, wow, wouldn't it be cool to feel heard, to feel received, to feel like I am valued, not in spite of, but because of this, opens just up a whole new level. But interestingly, most people say, I was okay doing this, but I don't think you could do it over here. But there's never been an over here that I've found where people haven't been willing and interested. Any final comments? I know we're supposed to end at 11:50. I would just love to have any, kind of final reflections on how you might take this forward, right? Or it's just a one-off, or do you see ways of applying this in your work or student or other life?
I guess I have a question for you because I really like this activity, but I don't know if I feel like I'm qualified or if I wanted to do this with maybe employees or another group. Do you have advice for if that's appropriate, how you would do it for other people? Because you're trained in this, and I feel like, could someone like me do this, or would that be a really bad idea?
No, absolutely. That's a great question. And in my experience, I haven't just facilitated these. I mean, students at our Interfaith Student Association have facilitated these. I've had students facilitate them in lots of different contexts, in residence life, all around campus. And I think as long as you sort of set the container, which is to say you set those safe space guidelines, which you would do for any kind of, activity that's going to involve any kind of vulnerable sharing on whatever topic it is, right? The confidentiality, the I'm not trying to change your mind, the I will respect what you say, I will listen. As long as you can set those guidelines, and I think as long as one of the things we didn't do is get people to buy into them, like maybe take a few minutes. So these are guidelines that normally work for people, but hey, let's talk about it. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Okay, let's talk about what do we need to add, and then can we all agree to these guidelines? Show of hands, or people speak it. And as long as you have that container set, you don't need any other training at all.
Thank you.
Yeah, great, thanks, good question. And Tony said no rush to get out of there. To get out of here. I appreciate that, Tony. So I'd love to hear from anybody who hasn't had a chance to speak. I'm really curious kind of where you're all at, where you're coming from, and if you see any way of incorporating any of these ideas to try and make the campus feel more inclusive and welcoming.
And
Bonnie.
in the chat too.
Yep.
Okay. So my breakout, the first time I was by myself, so I didn't talk to anybody, but so the second one made me a little bit more nervous because I'm like, oh no, now I have to just talk. And my name is like a big part of me. So even when Polly first was like, hi, Renee, then I was like, oh, that's actually not my name. So my name looks different, but I just liked the breakout. Also, just with those stipulations of like, I'm not going to be judging anybody. It's just an open conversation. I thought that was super helpful to have that.
Yeah.
Set the standard of kind of like, you're just explaining who you are and what you believe or what your traditions are. And I think it's interesting because in most cases, I think if you just set that standard, even in your own mind, then when you talk to somebody and be open-minded, then you find out that you have a lot more similarities than differences. Because even Polly and I, our religions weren't the same, but then our core values were exactly the same.
Yeah.
I think, right, Polly? So I think that's what you're going to find in life is most people are just trying to be their best person. Right. No one's trying to be a mean person or have like any hard feelings, so I think it's just interesting to just find out other people's religious beliefs, because that is such a big part of somebody's life, whether it's their religious beliefs or their spirituality, and just being understanding of who they are and where they come from. Oh, sorry.
Awesome. No, this is awesome. Thank you. Hi, little one. Nice to see you. Yeah, I'm so glad you shared that. And if we had more time to sort of go around the circle and have more breakout, time together, one of the things I think we would have found is you would have had more time to talk with more people. And that's usually what comes at the end of it. The debrief is like, oh, well, this person was pagan. Oh, this person is non-denominational Christian, but we still have these same values, right? And being able to find that helps us to then find a common ground, right? Where we can really meet in that place of our shared humanity. And that's really one of the whole reasons that we do this exercise. So yeah, thanks for articulating that. I'm glad you guys got a chance to talk about values, even though we had very little time. Yeah. Okay, Angeline asked a question. How do you set up vulnerable with family? Oh my gosh. How do you set up vulnerable? How can you share vulnerably with family? How can you set this container with family? Sometimes they're the hardest people to deal with. Yeah, amen. Right. Oh, right. As it is, and all those things from all those traditions. I absolutely concur. And I think, part of it is that there has to be willingness on both sides, right? There has to be willingness. People have to be open to agreeing to have a conversation in a way that maybe hasn't happened. And I think with family, we sometimes have so many sort of deep grooves about how we know we interact together, and the assumptions and the stereotypes of how my sister's going to respond if I say this rather than that. We really do need to kind of step back and say, can we come to this, as the Buddhists say, with a beginner's mind? Can we come to this conversation? First of all, what's our intention? Why do we want to do this anyway? Is this just a party game? Or is it something that, hey, maybe there's a conflict that we would really want to be able to work out, but in order to do that, we really have to listen to one another. I think families are among the hardest to do this with, but if there's that sense of mutual agreement that we really want to come together in a different way, you can set the container and people will, if you can set the container and if people will agree to it, I think that conversations even with family can be really, really helpful. And I think that I won't call you Renee because you said that that's not your name, but a previous speaker just commented on it. Really what this is about is cultivating listening, right? Cultivating listening, which we don't do enough as a society. In fact, one of the things sometimes I tell people when we're setting that safe space is, check yourselves. If you're in a dyad with somebody else and you're spending 45 seconds of the time that they're talking, imagining what your response is going to be, just stop. Just listen. Just bring yourself to listen and don't worry about what you're going to say. And if you hear your mind going, oh, well, I wouldn't have thought to say that, but now I guess it's okay to say that. Okay, well, what are they going to think? Just notice. Just notice. And try and check yourself so that you can really listen. Because if we can develop the capacity to listen, I think that's really what this is all about. Yeah, I'm happy to share my slides with you. Absolutely. And Angie, I can share them with you or with Alyssa, and you can post them however you want. All right.
Yeah, that would be great. I think we're probably about done with time. We've got to start our other presentation that starts at noon, but this was wonderful and such a great experience. And I think a lot of people enjoyed it and learned a lot. So thank you so much again, Bonnie, for taking your time and being with us today. So yeah, we'll get those slides. We will probably post them with our link of this recording. And then that will be available on the Aggie Wellness website, probably after end of this week or next week. So
Got it. Hey,
thank you.
thanks so much, everybody. Great to see you. Bye.